to the next point.
Towards
We should ensure
us.
whatever we say is clear.
That means work is being done. We can see that it is in opposite direction.
Hello students, you are most welcome to yet another segment of e-learning. Today our subject is CRS, that is Christian Religious Studies, and the topic on discussion today is social justice. What did I say, students? Yes, social justice. Now in our societies today, students, you tend to see that we are living with one another. And there is need for us to show love, to show concern for one another, so that we'll be able to enjoy ourselves, and even God who created us will be happy with us. So my students, let's go ahead to see what we have today on this social justice. Now, on social justice, the quality of a nation before God is dependent on the righteousness of its citizens, and it is based on the level with which people uphold virtues like love, concern for one another, justice, and so on. Any society that does not practice such virtues is not going to experience a peaceful coexistence with one another. My students, even in your classes, if you don't show concern for one another, if you are greedy in giving out your biro or pencil or cleaner to somebody in the class, you find out that when you are in need, nobody would like to give you anything. So there is need, my students, for us to show love for one another, even as we continue to live with one another in our various societies. Now, in the northern kingdom, Prophet Amos noticed that although the people appeared religious, social evils prevail, pointing to the false nature of their religious practices. People were not putting what they had into practice, but they were living to please themselves. Amos therefore preached against these evils. My students, if you look at our societies today, if you look at some streets, it's like that street should be named Church Street. But you cannot imagine the way people are living their lives. There is cheating all over, there are killings, and there are so many evils going on in our societies. It means that people go to church, they will hear, but they will not come and put all they will not put what they are hearing into practice. What is it? This is because people are so selfish. People don't want to listen to what God is telling them. And so they live to please themselves, not to please God or any other person in the society. Now, let us look at the background of Amos. That is the background to the message of Prophet Amos. Prior to the call of Amos to prophetic duty, he was a shepherd and a dresser of sycamore tree. Amos was a native of Tekoa in Judea, and he prophesied in the northern kingdom when Jeroboam II was the king. King Uzziah was also in Judah at that period. Now, my students, you tend to see that Amos was not a prophet right from the beginning, but that he was called by God himself to be a prophet. But before he was called by God to be a prophet, what was he doing? Amos was a dresser of a sycamore tree. And my students out there, those people that used to sell flowers, different kind of trees by the roadside, that was the kind of job Amos was doing before he was called by God to be a prophet. And so, what is a prophet, or who is a prophet, my students? A prophet is somebody that receives messages from God. And when those messages have been received, he doesn't keep those messages for his own consumption. But what will he do? He tells the people the mind of God. So I tend to see that a prophet is a mouthpiece of God. So Amos was called by God to prophesy to the people, to tell the people the mind of God. And why was he called to do that? Now let us go ahead to see why really God called Amos to be a prophet. Now, Israel was at that time economically sound, and this resulted to the increasing disparity between the rich and the poor. The oppression of the poor by the rich, therefore, became a dominant social evil. Was it a sin that God blessed the people at that time with so much? No. But you find out that inasmuch as the economy of Israel at that time was booming, instead of them to show concern for one another, instead of the rich ones to love the poor ones and show mercy to them, the result was different. They never showed them love, and so they were living the way they wanted to live. And so the rich ones were becoming richer, and the poor ones were becoming poorer, and God was not happy. Now, what Amos preached against? Amos preached and condemned the social evils at his time. He taught that God is not only one true and universal God, but also a just and righteous one. God demands that his people should practice justice and righteousness. The following were the social evils that Amos preached against. My students, have you ever seen rain falling on the farm of only the righteous people? No. God is just, and he expects his children to be just to one another. He expects his children to dispense justice whenever the need arises. So my students out there, never you think that you are not grown enough to dispense justice. No. Even in your classes, you should do it. Even when you go to the market, you should not cheat. Even if the person you are buying that thing from is blind, my students, you should be able to do the right thing at the right time. Do not tell lies by telling the person you want to buy anything from that, oh, I gave you 500 naira, but you are giving me a change of 200 naira. No, you must not cheat, my students. Riches comes only from God. Now, what Amos was preaching against was that the rich ones were oppressing the poor ones. And today, my students, we are going to look at these teachings on two aspects: oppression of the rich by the poor, and under the oppression of the rich by the poor, we have 4 good points that we are going to discuss. Then the second one is licentiousness. So let us see the first one. And before then, my students, you might be asked in your exams to compare the life of the people during the time of Amos with what we are passing through today. And as we discuss, my students, I want us to pay close attention. You should be attentive in what we are going to discuss, because what happened during the time of Amos is exactly what we are passing through today. And if you are asked to compare what happened during the time of Amos, you don't just write what happened during the time of Amos and leave out what we are passing through today. In a paragraph, you have to tell what the people passed through during the time of Amos, and in the next paragraph, you now state what we are actually passing through. And as we discuss, we shall see to all those points. Now, point A, dishonesty of the merchants or traders. My students, if you don't have money, you cannot sell anything. So the traders during the time of Amos used falsified weights and measures for the people they were selling to. They said, and I quote, "We may make the ephah small." that's the instrument of measurement, we may make the ephah small and shekel great and deal deceitfully with false balances. In most cases, these traders sold refuse or chaff as wheat to the poor. And that can be found in Amos chapter 8 from verse 4 to 6. My students, in those days, that is during the time of Amos, the traders who had the money, they were rather selling chaff or refuse to the poor ones. And you tend to see that since the poor ones don't have enough, they have to buy and buy. And in the process of buying, they were at the same time enriching the rich ones. So at that time, the poor ones were becoming poorer and the rich ones were becoming richer because they were using and selling chaff. They were using falsified measures to measure. Now, for example, my students, let us look at what is happening today. Peradventure, you want to go back to school, and mommy says, hey, have 500 naira for your gari and other things. Now, by the time you happen to go and buy your gari and you take it home, mommy might want to remeasure to see whether you have actually been given the right measures. But by the time you happen to have been given 4, when mommy remeasures again, she might end up getting maybe 3 or 2.5. So is it that mommy will ask you to go back? How much did you pay to the market? And for you to go back to the market, it's already, the money is even enough to buy another measure. So I tend to see my students, what was happening in the time of Amos is really what we are facing today. For example, again, if you go to the market, you want to buy a bag of maize. Now, the sellers, they have an instrument, very sharp. They will punch the bag of maize, and the clean maize will round down to that space, and they'll show you, the maize, the bag of maize is what? It's very clean. And by the time you take it down home, oh, my students, you regret it because you have been sold chaff rather than real maize. So is it that you go back? No. So today, my students, what happened during the time of Amos is actually happening in our time today. And those rich ones are honestly getting their money at the expense of you, the poor person. The second point, bribery and corruption. Bribery and corruption was mostly practiced at the low courts. The poor were denied justice at the judge, as the judge could easily be bought over, even with a pair of shoes. The rich trampled on the heads of the poor ones, because the poor had nothing to defend themselves. Truthfulness was not practiced, but deceitfulness. Bribery and corruption during the time of Amos was like the order of the day, my students. Particularly in the low courts. If anything happens between the rich and the poor, since the rich one happens to know that he was at fault as at that time, what he would do was that he would go to the market, get a pair of shoes, go to the judge and what? And bribe him. And before you, the poor person, gets to know about it, what happens? You'll be locked up. And what are we passing through today, my students? It's the same thing. If you happen to maybe trample upon the leg or the foot of any rich person, you'll be in trouble. Before you know it, you'll be locked up. For example, if you happen to, like some of our students in our various schools today, you all know them, students from the rich men's houses. By the time you happen to fight and they are caught, you have been reported maybe to the principal or the discipline master. The student would like to tell you whom his father is. And he will boldly say it, do you know who my father is? And before you know it, the case will just die off. And you, the poor man's person, will be punished. So I tend to see that, my students, bribery and corruption, as at that time, was everywhere. And if we look at in our societies today, it's the same thing. Everywhere. you are a citizen of Nigeria, you cannot apply a school of your choice. And even if you happen to apply, what happens, my students? You will not be given the course you applied. You'll be given a course you didn't even think of. And what do? Because you are from a poor man's background, you just go like that. But right from your heart, you are what? You are regretting it. So, it's only God that will save us from such, my students. Now, greed, the 13, and drunkenness. The women of Samaria was mostly condemned in this aspect. They were making excessive demands on their husbands, who in turn robbed and crushed the poor in order to meet the demands of their wives. They were overfed, and Prophet Amos described them as cows of Bashan. During the time of Amos, my students, the rich men's wives were demanding excessively from their husbands. And since their husbands were living at the detriment of the poor ones, they were providing their needs at all times. They were eating anyhow, and they were becoming fatter and fatter. So Amos, look at the cows of Bashan that were fat. He described those women as cows of Bashan. And today, my students, if you go to the market, you cannot imagine the way the wives of the rich men are purchasing their goods. It's like they are buying for their shops, but it's just for their consumption. And when you go to the house, the children will eat, they will pour out the milk, they will pour out the milk, the drink, the stew, and whatever. Even when you happen to school with the children of the rich ones in the secondary or in the universities, my students, you cannot imagine what they are eating. But you are looking for red oil to just make that rice to just have, to be bright enough at least for you to have something in the stomach and go for your studies. So, the next one, selfish luxury of the rich. The rich live in affluence. They lived in costly buildings, that is stone houses, and they use expensive beds made of ivory, all at the expense of the poor in the society. They ate costly lambs and fattened calves. My students, these stone houses that these people were building were not just ordinary stones they were picking by the roadsides, or they didn't go to the farm to pick these stones. These stones were precious stones. These stones were costly. They were bought with money. And in our days today, when you compare it, there are some of our rich men today, their fences are being surrounded. They decorate it with what? With precious stones. And some of the houses with glass houses. And since you don't even have a mirror in your house, my students, as you are passing by, what do? You look at yourself in the mirror and adjust your dressing, and you begin to go. So I tend to see that the rich are living at the expense of the poor ones during Amos' time and even in our time today. So my students, these were the things that God called Amos to preach against. Let the people have concern for one another. Let them share the riches they have with one another, because they don't know tomorrow. You remember the story of the parable of the rich man and the poor person? The poor person died and was taken to heaven, while the rich man, where did he land? Yes, he landed in hell. So my students, there is need to show concern for one another. Now let us proceed and see what Amos was actually out for. Now, the second aspect of what Amos preached against was licentiousness. What did I say, my students? Yes, licentiousness. What is it? What does it mean, my students? Now, licentiousness is a state of ignoring societal standards, particularly in sexual conduct. It is an act of disregarding accepted rules. My students out there, even in our times, what is happening? Our students, even you students out there, and some of the girls, are dressing half naked, inviting these men. Why is it that we have the issue of rape all over? It's because these students dress is like they are inviting these men to come and use them anyhow. So my students out there, there is need for you to dress neat. There is need for you to dress moderately, not to please yourselves, not to please your friends, but dress in such a way that God himself will be happy with you. And even your parents will what? Will buy more for you. So you tend to see that licentiousness was practiced during the time of Amos, and in our society today is the same thing. Now, during the time of Amos, sexual immorality was one of the societal evils. If you look at Amos chapter 2, verse 7, for example, a son and a father went into the same maiden or girl, and that is an act of profaning the name of God. Amos was known to be the prophet of social justice. Is it not happening in our societies today, my students? You find a father is already there before the son. And when they meet in that girl's house, they what? They fight each other. Why? Are there no girls? There are so many girls in the society. Instead of them to pick the ones they can pick and love, you find out that they will use those girls and just dump them. And these girls will be left with sicknesses and what have you. So, my students, we have moral lessons to learn in this topic. 1, students should be into one form of business or the other. For example, farming, barbing, tailoring, and what have you. All these things are there in our societies, my students. You can enroll yourself in any of these trades so that you get yourselves busy. You will not be found in the society going about anyhow, but at least you have something to do, to fend for your living and even to help your parents. Secondly, try to shun any social evil in the society. Dress moderately, my students. Talk where you are supposed to talk. Don't begin to walk by the street and as a lady, you are what? You are eating sugarcane, chewing gum. You know, opening your mouth anyhow. Look at the way you dress, half naked. Whom are you showing those breasts and those laps to? My students, you have to be very, very careful. God is not happy with us. Try to be honest in all things. Try to be honest. Even in your exams, be honest. You see, by the time you read hard, in fact, you look at the time allocated for that exams to be too much because you are actually set for these exams. But when you are not ready, you want to cheat. Are you honest? No, my students. Do not involve yourself in bribery and corruption. Don't involve yourself in such evil. Do not cheat on your friends because they are poor. You don't know tomorrow, my students. It's God that gives riches. So do not cheat on that poor girl or that poor boy, believing that you have arrived. God is the giver of all things. Do not make excessive demands from your parents. Whatever you are asked to take in school, my students, be sincere. Tell them exactly. And as time goes on, when they have enough, they can even say, I've given you this to take to school, and I'm adding this. Just take this, use it, and buy whatever you want. And when you buy those things, my students, make sure you go back to your parents and show them to your parents. Watch and pray on the girl or boy you want to marry and not engage yourselves in sexual immorality. there is something that you students do when a girl is pregnanted. When you pregnant a girl, you just tell that girl that she should never mention your name. And even some of the parents out there, they'll say, my child is not up to the age of pregnanting a girl. So at the end of it, that girl will be dumped and she will become a wasted material in the society. And if care is not taken, if the parents are not merciful enough, the mother might not take away the child from that girl to continue her schooling, but you just leave her to waste away. Be careful, my students. Make sure you don't just deceive any girl anyhow, but you have to be truthful in whatever you do. Now, before I leave my students, I have an assignment for you. Question 1A, list and explain the social evils that prevail in the northern kingdom during the reign of King Jeroboam II. 1B, give 4 lessons to be learned from Prophet Amos' teachings. Now, this assignment again, list and explain the social evils that prevail in the northern kingdom during the reign of King Jeroboam II. 1B, give 4 lessons to be learned from the teachings of Amos. And I remain as a Bedave in Dagjana. My contact number, please, when you are contacting me, let me know your name and where you are calling from. And the number is 080-7725-1542. My students, stay home, stay safe. Coronavirus is real, and keep learning. God bless you.